Hello YouTube, this is Morgan, Airspeed Prime, and this is going to be the first video in my Airspeed's Avatar Rewatch video series, and obviously that means I'm going to be starting with discussing the first episode of Avatar The Last Airbender, which is Book 1, Water, Episode 1, The Boy in the Iceberg. So yeah, of course we're starting with Book 1. So yeah, the first episode, and just straight away, the way I'm going to be doing these videos is I'm going to be like referring to the fact that obviously like I've seen these episodes so many times. It's going to be a detail focused, kind of analysis focused kind of video series, trying to go as in depth as possible without making the videos exceptionally long, but definitely referring to other stuff, like foreshadowing from this episode to other stuff that happens later on. So just be aware of that. But yeah, let's just jump straight in. One thing I will note, I'll be kind of noting for it as we go through the show, is just the different animation studios that actually have worked on Avatar. So I think with Korra, everyone is aware of the different animation studios, Studio Mir and Studio Pierrot. With Avatar, not as much. People aren't aware that there are actually like three, technically four if you count the separate animation company for the kind of intro stuff. But there are three animation studios that have worked on Korra, and like there's obviously the main one who eventually became Studio Mir, and then there are the other ones. So the first episode, of course, is animated by the main animation studio, JM Animation, and we'll address, when we get to our first kind of episode by the other animation studios, to see if you guys are aware of the difference and so on. But anyway, The Boy in the Iceberg, the series has to start somewhere, and for such a popular franchise, how is the first episode of Avatar? Obviously, it's a two-parter to start things off, so we're only really discussing half of the kind of opening batch of content that we got. But I still think this episode by itself is a very, very solid episode. I think it's fair to say, though, that it is not, when you look at the entire series, one of the best episodes in the show, in that very quickly there are a lot of episodes you'd place above it, and it eventually gets to the point where it is probably in the lower third of episodes within the series. Just, it speaks to the quality of the show overall that is the case. But, not to say that this is a bad episode by any means. I actually think it's really good, and I don't have many problems with it. It just happens that this show has so many really, really good episodes that this one ends up coming, I think, more towards the bottom of like an overall top episode list. So why do I think this is such a good first episode? I think the main thing is just that it really establishes the world quite well without overloading you with information. That they make it very clear what the Avatar is immediately, because that's the franchise name. Avatar, The Legend of Aang, The Last Airbender, whatever region you're talking about. They make it very clear that the Avatar is the only person in the show who's going to be able to bend all four elements, and in doing so, they kind of establish this whole idea of like, okay, there are four elements, and each of the nations within the world is kind of, based on one of these elements. And we don't go fully in depth, but we get the idea to a degree. The Fire Nation are the ones kind of that have started this war. The Earth Kingdom is the big kingdom that still has to be conquered in the war. The Water Tribes are, where the waterbenders are from. And then, there's the Air Temples, but we don't get them mentioned just yet because it's obviously a pretty important plot point of Aang being the last airbender. And they do foreshadow that, I think, quite well with the visuals of, you see the Air Temples burning in the background as you get the extended opening. But just the idea that, like, the Avatar was kind of the hope for the world, but the Avatar disappeared just as the war started, and most people have abandoned hope of the Avatar ever returning. But Katara, who comes across in this first episode as almost our main character, she hasn't lost hope. She hopes that the Avatar will still return. And that's kind of where we really entered the series, with Sokka and Katara in the Water Tribe. I like that it's a very isolated opening, that this is such a big world with so much history to it. But it's so interesting that they actually started off very kind of low-key. It's just a brother and sister on a little boat in the Water Tribe. A really interesting location, but a very isolated location. There's not a lot going on. You don't see a lot of bending in this first episode, and that you very quickly get established that Katara is like the last waterbender in the south. and they establish, that there are more waterbenders in the north, but that the south was hit quite hard in the war, and the north hasn't really been hit. And Aang, of course, has established that he's the last airbender. So very quickly they established that two of the four nations, there's basically only a handful of benders for those nations, and only one for airbending. Whereas, like, we see, 4 or 5 benders immediately with Zuko, his uncle, and his sparring partners. And then, of course, they pretty much established that the Earth Kingdom, to put up a fight in the war, probably has a similar amount of benders as well. So, immediately presenting the big nations versus the small nations, and so on. And, we obviously know now through context that the reason the South is the way it is because Azulon, the Fire Lord before Ozai, was the one who actually, made the attack happen on the south, whereas obviously Sozin's thing was the attack on the air temples. And now Ozai, his thing becomes the attack on the Earth Kingdom, with a kind of side plot throughout the first part of obviously attacking the north for the first time in the war. So you see a lot of this kind of world building being like presented initially in the first episode, but coming back to the point of it being a kind of isolated opening start, it's nice that they do that, because I think it would be very easy to just overload you with stuff, like immediately jump into a battle between people bending off for elements, like trying to establish which nation you're in, all this action battle going on. Instead, they kind of leave the action in this first episode to like penguin sledding, some kind of more subtle, kind of random pieces of like airbending that Aang uses, Katara waterbending to fish, and so on. Zuko kind of in his sparring lessons being the proper like combat bending that we get within this episode. So immediately presenting this idea with what Iroh says to Zuko, that like with bending there is like a philosophy to it. It's not just a special power and they know how to use it kind of superhero style. That there is a martial art, a philosophy behind each element. And Iroh kind of explaining with fire, power and firebending comes from the breath, and Zuko was not focusing on the muscles. That was a really interesting thing to get across. That ultimately becomes this huge distinction moment between firebenders, of the people who focus more on it just as like power, muscles and stuff like that, physical strength, versus an Iroh who right now just seems to be the guy who's kind of guarding Zuko and kind of teaching Zuko, but later is established to be this person who knows the true way of firebending, and what he's teaching Zuko here is kind of the path to be the best firebender he can be, by focusing on things that most firebenders tend not to focus on. And with the introduction of the characters, which I'll get into, it's very interesting how they do it, and that they start off with Sokka and Katara immediately, like waterbender who has a lot of responsibility on her within the village, but you can tell throughout the entire episode with Katara that she doesn't quite come out and say it. They don't kind of make it a theme with Katara's character here that she wants to get out of the water tribe, but I think it's there in the background that she feels such a responsibility to the tribe that she's kind of putting away what she actually really wants to do. They present more of it in the next episode a little bit, but just that she is a waterbender, but her abilities are almost going to waste because there's no one to teach her. And you can tell that she really wants to do that. And so when Aang enters the episode, you can see how interested she is in him, just because he comes from a different nation. He is so interesting. He brings fun back into things for the village. And she kind of wants to experience that again. Just this idea that Aang coming into Katara's life is this opportunity for her in a way. He's immediately offering her, like, I have a sky bison, it can fly. I can bring you to the north if you want to train. I can make that happen for you. Just this something that was an impossibility for her before, just because of how small the tribe is now completely possible just because of this random encounter. And then Sokka doesn't know it yet, but that him meeting Aang is going to actually allow him to properly become the warrior that he wants to be, the leader that he wants to be. Because throughout this whole episode, you see lots of moments with Sokka of he talks big, that he's the warrior left in the village, he's going to protect everyone. But you can see that he has some level of skill, but has very little experience and isn't quite there yet on the skill front. he doesn't have the leadership qualities and isn't quite a warrior. He's still, in training, and there's no one there to train him. So, like, when you get that moment of him kind of being a bit sexist towards Katara and she calls him out for it, it's not this case of, like, oh, I hate Sokka because he was sexist. You kind of get why that's the case. Because when you see the whole village, it's elderly people, some kids, and then the only two people that are, like, in or around that kind of, young adult age, are teenager, young adult, is Sokka and Katara. So you can see why so much responsibility is put on them, but why also they need to either go on an adventure or just commit to just, staying as part of the tribe. And why that's such a kind of issue for them, and why the journey that happens in the next episode is actually such an important thing for the two of them, because they do have such potential. Katara to become a powerful waterbender, and Sokka to become a warrior, which ends up being the arc that they have. Like, compare this first episode to where the series ends. Katara is the master waterbender in the world. She is basically the most powerful one. Sokka is a very accomplished warrior who has lots of experience all across the world. And because of that, like, he in a way is almost more experienced than some of the much older people who are warriors within the tribe, just because of his sheer travel experience and the importance of the fights that he's fought in. He gains all of that stuff that he's kind of missing here. And then with Aang, you only get a touch on it in this first episode, but just the idea that he's this reluctant avatar. They reveal he's the avatar, but when Katara brings it up, he doesn't just come out and say, yeah, I'm the avatar, I got trapped in ice. It's no, I don't really feel comfortable talking about the fact that I'm the avatar around anyone. I don't want people to know. He's keeping it a secret. And why is that the case? We see the little flashback of him falling into the water and kind of why he was in ice. But we don't know how he got into that situation, the context for what exactly happened there. And that's interesting, because otherwise he is such a fun character who, as an air nomad, knows the world very well. He's just like, I know the Fire Nation, I know people from the Fire Nation, there's no way there's a war going on. And so to be told that there has been a war going on for 100 years, that's a big reveal as well, just that, whoa, you've been out of action for 100 years. And you can tell there's an emotional reaction of just like, whoa, I've been out of action for 100 years. And to some degree, the full impact of that hits him. But I think you can tell that he hasn't fully thought things through, that, oh, that means everyone I know is dead. Anyone I know who is not just super young is dead at this point because of everything that happened. And then I think most importantly, he isn't at this point aware of the Air Nomad genocide, what exactly happened at the start of the war. And that becomes a huge thing in episode 3. So I like that there's still a lot of stuff to kind of be revealed with Aang right now. Because it's such an isolated opening, the Water Tribe almost doesn't know the full extent of what happened in the war, because they were hit so hard. And they can barely tell him what's going on. So I like a lot of this stuff that kind of happens here with the characters. So I'll just refer to some of my notes here. Just coming back to Sokka for a second. Great reference here in terms of foreshadowing, I suppose, to a degree, with Bato of the Water Tribe, that episode, because when they find Aang, it basically is a result of Sokka's failed ice dodging, which is also obviously this kind of important thing for Water Tribe men to, I suppose, move from being boys to men, that they with instruction from their father figure, get kind of taught how to properly ice dodge in a canoe. Sokka, obviously his father being away in the war, doesn't have that, so you can see when an ice dodging course basically comes up, he struggles. He has some skill, but he really struggles and they crash, and that's why they end up next to the place where Aang comes up from. And I like how that's a reference to the fact that later on, just a little bit into the journey, he's learned enough that he can accomplish the ice dodging stuff quite well and becomes a little bit of a better leader. So I like that that's set up here. I really do like that. Similarly with Katara, the idea of like her water bending, that she finds Aang because she gets very emotional, angry at Sokka, and that causes her water bending to be more powerful, and that kind of bends Aang out of the ice basically. So there's little things like that that I really do think are kind of well done. Little things like the second Katara and Aang meet, you can sort of tell that they're setting up a relationship, but the characters are so well done that you don't really have a problem with the maybe it's kind of obvious kind of thing of just like, oh, the main female character, main male character, they're already kind of hinting at a relationship, because it is kind of just so well done, the interaction, that in this episode Katara is putting so much faith in Aang because he's so interesting and is adding so much to her otherwise, you can tell, quite mundane life, where she's just burdened with a lot of responsibilities with her mother gone and so on. And if there's any issue I think with this first episode, it's perhaps just that the humor is a little off. You can tell it's a little overly Nickelodeon. Like, obviously most people bring up the point of just like, wow, this is a Nickelodeon show. Like, this doesn't really compare to anything else on Nickelodeon. So, some of the humor, like Appa sneezing and Sokka getting covered in snot, little things like that is a bit of a like, oh, that's a bit childish humor. Whereas, like, it still has like some of the really good stuff. Like, this is Katara, my flying sister, and really it felt higher than that. They're nicely and written lines. It's just some of the stuff, they still have the Nickelodeon slime toilet humor stuff going on. Just a lot of nice little things going on here. Some other foreshadowing moments, like Iroh saying to Zuko, a man needs his rest, when Zuko's basically been up all night as they approach the light, and he doesn't listen to Iroh, which is a foreshadowing, a kind of bookmark on book one, of at the end of book one, Iroh says the same thing to him, and he does finally sleep, kind of showing a growth, showing this idea that he's not sleeping in a way because he's so driven to capture the Avatar, what he's been tasked with. And then at the end, he's just so tired of everything, and does it even matter if he captures the Avatar for his father anymore? These questions start to come into his mind, and I like how that arc overall kind of comes about. But what are some of the other stuff I have here? The small village, of course. North and South, the comics recently have established that there are actually more villages in the South. Even at this point in time, they're just more further inland. But fundamentally, the effect of the war on the Southern Water Tribe is that it's gone from being relatively large tribes to the tribes being quite isolated from each other and only being, like 10, 20 people in each tribe. So that's the kind of effect that's kind of been had here. What else do I have here? The penguin sledding moment is really nice. Just the music, how fun it is, and how they transition from probably the most fun moment of the episode to one of the darker moments of the episode with the reveal of the Fire Nation ship, which is an interesting one in that it's obviously a great kind of continuity moment, in that we later in Hama's backstory actually get how that ship came to be there and the full context for the basic story that Katara gives us here. Just before we get to that, we have Aang offering Katara the opportunity, like, I can't teach you waterbending, but I can fly you to somewhere where you can. And that opportunity being the big thing of just like, she knows she has commitments with the tribe, but that she can sort of tell that she's meant to do more than just be there and take care of the tribe. That, in a way, as Gran says in the next episode, it was kind of destiny that, Katara and Sokka found Aang. And with the Fire Nation ship, I think the only weird part of the episode is just they set up the flare, which is fine. It's just how they set it off, and like the reason it's set up that way is so weird, that the entrance to basically the bridge of the ship, where the captain basically is, where the helmsman is. So they basically establish here that when a Fire Nation ship crashes, it activates this security feature where like a tripwire comes up on the door of the bridge into the ship, and if you step over that, a flare goes off. A little bit weird in that I think there was a way to alert Zuko to Aang's location without it being really convoluted like that. But yeah, and then the last note I have here is just Zuko's eyesight, which is a pretty funny joke of just like, it is a weird thing that like Aang's been frozen in ice for 100 years. No one expected that to be a thing. And so Zuko expects to be fighting this 112-year-old bending veteran. And so to see, like, oh, he's holding someone and jumping down, like, he's very spry in his old age. Just like, wow, Zuko, get some glasses there. But I get the idea that Zuko is meant to be really far away, can only see someone jumping. And then I think the final point with Zuko I just want to bring up is just, I like how they kind of establish here that Zuko is just a kind of slightly above average bender right now. That he's only just moving on to like the advanced techniques of firebending. That's kind of the way things have gone for him. That he has to really force himself through all these kind of simple drills that Iroh says you haven't even mastered the basics yet. So it is this journey of these characters who are only just coming into their own, which makes Aang very interesting in that he is a master airbender, and that is, it's not just he happens to be that, he's just a ceremonial title. He is actually a master airbender, but because he's from a culture that is not really like proficient, I'm not gonna say proficient, but their aim is not really about fighting. That's why his mastery kind of doesn't just immediately win him all of his fights, because he's not trying to be aggressive in any of his fights. But that's for another video. But yeah, I think that's more or less all I wanted to say about this first episode. This one's obviously going to be longer because it's the introduction to a lot of the characters and a lot of the context of what's going on here. But it is a very, very good opening episode. The only issues being some of the humor stuff, and perhaps Iroh being a tiny bit out of character, just because it seems like they present him in this and the next episode as being slightly gruffer than they present him basically in any other episode. Like, they basically fix it by episode 3, but you can tell by the whole like drill it again and him being a little bit more forceful towards Zuko at times that it's not the Iroh from like episode 3 or anything like that. That it's meant to be a big point when Iroh actually gets angry at Zuko much later on in the series. So, just a little bit with Iroh's characterization. I'll talk about it more in the next video for the Avatar Returns. But yeah, solid opening episode, but it is fair to say this is not one of the best episodes of the series, but it does its job really well in terms of bringing you into the series. The extended opening for this episode does a great job at establishing a lot of things. The introduction of our kind of four initial main characters here, Zuko, Aang, Katara, Sokka, is actually really well done. Of just like Katara, waterbender, no one to train her, hoping the Avatar basically finds the Avatar. How will that reveal go down? The skeptical warrior who isn't very good at being a warrior, Sokka, who we're going to use for humor, but there's also a hint here of just like, because he has no one to teach him as well, and so a journey could do well for him. The reluctant Avatar Aang, who's kind of a person out of time, and then Zuko, they've just very clearly present like he's been burdened with this kind of destiny of trying to find the Avatar when his kind of his grandfather hasn't, and the sense of like there's more to this than just he's trying to fulfill the goal of people from his past. That there's the full extent of the whole banishment thing hasn't been presented just yet, but really interesting characters immediately in the first episode. Final thing I'll mention is just something that affects the first couple of episodes, because I'm obviously watching it off the DVD. I think you have to say it. It is a absolute shame, and I can't believe that it's still this way, that the only physical release of Avatar on DVD, every version of the DVD has the same problems, and it's not the animation of the episode, it is absolutely the DVD problem of that weird halo effect that makes the lines look double at certain points in episodes. It really badly affects the first couple of episodes, especially the first disc here. It sorts itself out for the most part throughout the rest of the series, but there are certain episodes where it kind of comes back. And it just speaks to the fact that, like, why have they never done anything to fix this problem? Even if they had to do some remastering on the series, I think it's such a popular series that they should. It feels so weird that just this incredibly popular show has an awful like initial kind of DVD physical media release. But yeah, that's the first review. So in the comments, let me know what your thoughts are on this first episode here, The Boy in the Iceberg. Thoughts on the format of this video. As I said, This one's going to be a little bit longer than most of them will be, just because it's the first episode. My plan would be more or less to keep them to like somewhere between 15 and 20 minutes for like every episode going forward. This one's just extended because it is the first one. But yeah, that's been the video. Thanks for watching, and bye.